My family is the most important thing in my life. I was raised in a small hamlet, practically in the middle of nowhere, called Pine Hollow. It was pretty much an area for farming. Of course, there were neighboring towns with other things to do, but I always felt that I was destined to be a city boy. When I graduated high school, I took the first chance and moved towards the hustle of the city. My parents were sad to see me go, but they knew that it was inevitably what I wanted. The years went by, and I kept in close contact with my mom. One day, I got a phone call that my dad went off on a hike and hadn't returned for almost 14 hours. I used my vacation days at work and traveled back home to try to help. It would take me a few hours to get home from the city, and those annoying, winding back roads were never my favorite. I took my time driving, especially with all of the wild animals around. I tried to take in the surrounding mountains and the beautiful scenery, just to get my mind off of the situation I was driving towards. When I finally made my way to town, I passed the old welcome sign and the old creepy church with the broken bell tower window. There were vines growing everywhere around the structure. The building's windows were boarded up, and there was a large slab of wood that was barricading the door. Creepy as anything, and that cemetery right next to it didn't do it justice. It was such a shame. I'm sure it was beautiful at one point in time. When I returned home, my mother was trying to stay strong, but I could see in her eyes that she was devastated and worried. I tried to comfort her the best I could, but with Dad missing, I couldn't help worrying either. The police were in, out, and around, trying to locate him. He had left Mom a note saying where he would be, but when the police and the rangers went looking, there was no sign of him, or his car. When the police had asked around town if anyone had seen him, everyone's answer was the same. They didn't know he had even left in the first place. This was odd, especially living in a small town. Someone should have seen him. I wanted to stay with my mom and help her with whatever she needed, but she insisted on me walking around town to see if anyone had seen or heard from Dad. I did what I was told. I strolled down the one road that went through this old town, waving to neighbors, asking about Dad, but I came up empty. I made my way from one end of town to the other. It was starting to get dark by the time I passed the old church. I couldn't help but stop and stare at the decaying structure. As a kid, my dad would always tease me and say that the place was haunted. Therefore, I never went near it. As I stood there, I noticed music being played in the distance. Organ music. It couldn't have been coming from the church. There was no way in. Everything was covered up. I took one last look at the church, and I could have sworn I saw a pair of eyes looking back at me through one of the broken boards in one of the windows. I didn't stay to find out. I quickly turned and jogged back to my parents' house. There was no way I was going to investigate that. When I got back, my mother was sitting in her rocking chair in the living room. She looked half asleep, so I crept in and gave her a kiss on the head before heading up to bed. Her eyes shot open and let out this horrifying gasp of air as she grabbed my arm tightly. I jumped so hard, I let out a tiny scream. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked. She nodded sleepily. "I saw your father," she said. "He's been trying to fix up that old church for so long. I feel like I never see him anymore." What she was saying didn't make any sense. I didn't try to argue with her, seeing that she was definitely sleep-talking. I told her goodnight and went up to bed. She really does have the weirdest dreams. The next morning, I made my way down to the kitchen to find my mom making breakfast. She seemed like she was in a better mood than yesterday, especially given the fact that my dad was still missing, and there hasn't been any developments about his whereabouts. I sat down at the table, and before I could utter a word, she jumped right into conversation. "There's going to be a get-together over at the church," she said. I gave her a confused look. "That church is abandoned and disgusting," I replied. She just stood there and smiled. "I think you should go. Everyone from town is going to be there. They will be so excited to see you again." I rolled my eyes. I'm pretty sure my mother has lost her mind. But instead of arguing, I figured I would entertain the ridiculous idea and take a little walk anyway. I finished breakfast and kissed my mom goodbye. She stood in the doorway and waved. As I got down the road a little, I could still see her waving, and I could have sworn I heard her call out, "Bye, honey. Abandon all hope." Not only did that not make any sense, but what a weird thing to say. I shook it off and figured that I misheard what she was saying. As I approached the church property, I realized that the church was looking a little more vibrant than the day before. The outside looked like it had a fresh coat of white paint on it. The vines were all cut away from the building, and there weren't any boards on the windows, and the door to the entrance was a bright red color. As I came closer to the building, I couldn't help but feel drawn to the structure. I walked up the front steps and grabbed the door handle. I opened the door slightly and peered in. To my surprise, there were a bunch of people inside talking and laughing with one another. I walked in and closed the door behind me. The sound of organ music filled the air. When the door clicked, the people all turned and looked at me. "Hello, welcome," they all called out to me. I was met by smiling faces all around. I didn't know any of them. They were wearing really olden day clothing, but I didn't pay much attention. I made my way through the crowd of people, greeting them as I passed. That's when I looked up toward the balcony where the music was coming from. And as I did, the music stopped. I looked around, and all of the people in the church fell silent. They just stood there with blank expressions on their faces. "Hello?" I called out. No one moved. Then a blood-curdling scream came from the balcony, ringing throughout the church. I jumped and ran toward the front door. "Abandon all hope," the people said at once. As I ran, the people started to fade away into dust. I pushed through, and when I made it to the door, I realized I was in the broken-down church. It was so dark. The boards on the windows shut almost all of the light out, and the front door was blocked by that giant piece of wood. I slammed my body into the barricade. "I have to get out of here," I whispered to myself. I backed up to charge the door again when my feet were swept out from underneath me. I hit the ground hard and tried to climb to my feet. As I stumbled upright, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and a soft whisper grazed my ear. "Abandon all hope. The last one of this town. You're mine now."